The morning broke without warmth. A gray sky hung low over the high desert, pressing the light into a dull silver that did not reach the earth. The wind came thin and bitter from the mountains, lifting the ash that still clung to the remains of his home. The house was gone, burned clean to the stone foundation, and the smell of it lingered like old sorrow, smoke and pine and something sharp, like scorched wool. Elias stood there, motionless, his hat brim wet with the mist that had begun to fall. His right hand was wrapped in a rag dark with blood, but he hardly felt it. He had dug until the bones of his fingers split open, pulling at timbers, at embers, searching for the last piece of what had once been his life. The fire had taken it all, the horses, the cattle, and the only two faces that ever looked at him with love. The sheriff had said it was lightning, a spark in the storm. But Elias knew better. Lightning did not split fences with clean axes. It did not scatter hoofprints that led north toward the canyon. He had found them 4 sets of tracks, heavy, staggered, booted. Men he once traded with, men who smiled when they shook his hand. He pressed his palm to the black earth where the porch used to be. Beneath the ash, something cold touched his skin metal. He drew it out slowly, brushing away soot. It was the little tin horse his boy had carved from scrap. The paint had melted, but the shape held. Elias closed his fist around it and sank to his knees. His throat made no sound. The desert did not care. The wind moved through the empty corral, through the charred cottonwoods, through him. When he finally stood, the world had turned pale. The sun hung behind a veil of thin cloud, offering no warmth. He saddled the only horse that had survived, an old roan with a blind eye, and rode out. No destination, only the tracks ahead. His back ached, his hands trembled, but he rode until the sky went black again. By the second night, hunger had begun to gnaw, but he could not bring himself to stop. The tracks faded into stone, then vanished among the red cliffs. He cursed, struck his fist against the saddle horn, and the roan startled. The horse stumbled, throwing him to the hard ground. When he tried to rise, a sharp pain shot up his side. He lay there, breath ragged, dust filling his mouth. The world tilted and dim. He woke to the smell of smoke. Not his own this time. A small fire flickered a few yards away. Shadows moved near it. He tried to sit up, but his ribs screamed. A figure came closer, small, silent, the outline of a girl. She wore deerskin stitched with sinew, her hair braided with small beads of turquoise and bone. In her hand was a clay bowl of water. He stared, unsure if she was real. "Drink," she said. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. He hesitated, but his throat was so dry he could not refuse. He drank. The water was warm, tasting faintly of earth. When he looked again, she was watching him with eyes as dark and still as the desert at night. "You found me," he rasped. She shook her head. "You were loud," the horse called. Elias turned his head. The roan stood a few feet away, tied to a mesquite branch, chewing lazily. The girl had made a small camp, a lean shelter of brush and a pot of stew simmering over coals. He tried to speak again, but the pain stopped him. She noticed, placed a hand on his shoulder, and pressed him back down. Her fingers were light but firm. There was no fear in her touch, no hesitation. "Rest," she said. "You will not die tonight." He closed his eyes because he did not have the strength to argue. When he woke again, the fire was out and the sun was up. The girl sat near him, sharpening a knife with a stone. The scent of cooked rabbit hung in the air. "Who are you?" he asked. She looked up, expression unreadable. "No one's daughter," she said simply. "And you?" He swallowed hard. "No one's father." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved through the dry grass, whispering between them. She rose, handed him a strip of meat, and turned away. He ate slowly, each chew pulling at his chest. But the food steadied him. She spoke again, her back still turned. "You ride where there is no road. What do you seek?" "Men," he said. "The kind that burn houses and steal lives." She nodded once. "Then you will need to heal first." Her tone was calm, certain, like she had already decided his fate. Elias watched her as she packed the small camp, her movements practiced, efficient. He did not know her name or why she had chosen to save him, but something in the way she carried herself quiet, deliberate, made him believe she had survived more than her share of fires, too. The wind rose again, scattering dust into the air. He looked toward the horizon, where the land bent and folded into shadow. Somewhere out there, the men who had taken everything from him were waiting. He did not yet know it, but the girl beside him would lead him to them, and to something far greater. The days that followed came like slow rain, quiet, deliberate, leaving their mark one drop at a time. Elias healed under the girl's care, though neither of them spoke much. The desert didn't need words. It had its own language in the sigh of wind and the call of faraway birds. She had made a small shelter of stone and brush against a canyon wall. A stream trickled nearby, narrow and cold, fed by snowmelt from the high country. Every morning she rose before dawn, slipping out with her bow, returning with rabbits or quail. Elias tried to help, but his ribs burned when he bent or lifted, so he sat and watched, his shame rising with the light. He had never known silence like this, not even after the fire. It pressed on him, made him hear things he didn't want to hear. His son's laughter echoing through memory, his wife's voice calling from the porch, the creak of the swing she used to sit on. Sometimes, when the wind came from the south, it smelled faintly of wood smoke, and his chest would tighten until it hurt to breathe. The girl moved like part of the land itself, light-footed, sure. She said little, but when she did speak, her words carried a strange authority, as if the desert itself had taught her. Elias learned her name only after 3 days, when he asked, and she finally answered. "Nahi," she said. "It means one who returns." He didn't ask what she returned from. The way her eyes darkened told him enough. By the 5th morning, he was strong enough to walk down to the stream. He bent to wash his face, and in the clear water his reflection startled him. His beard had grown ragged, his skin drawn tight. The man who stared back looked older than he remembered, harder, emptier. He splashed the water over his head, but the cold could not wake him from the heaviness inside. When he looked up, Nahi was watching from a short distance, her expression unreadable. "You hunt?" she asked. "I did." She tilted her head slightly. "Then you will again." He tried to laugh, but it came out rough. "Don't seem likely. You breathe. That is enough." Her words struck him with more weight than he expected. He wanted to ask her where she learned to speak that way, like someone twice her age, but she had already turned away, walking toward the hills. That afternoon she brought him a bow. It was small, made from juniper and sinew, the string worn but strong. "You need to move," she said. "The body forgets if you let it." He took it from her and tested the draw. The pull sent a flare of pain through his ribs, but he didn't stop. He had once been a good shot. His father had taught him long before the war, before the ranch. The feel of the bow in his hand brought something back, something older than grief. They practiced together. She moved with precision, every arrow loosed like a whisper. He missed more than he hit, but she didn't mock him. When he cursed, she only said, "The arrow goes where the breath goes. Calm it." Each evening they sat by the fire, the silence easier now. Sometimes she hummed a tune low and haunting, the kind that felt older than the mountain. Elias found himself listening not to the melody, but to the steadiness of her voice. On the 7th day, when his ribs no longer throbbed with every breath, she told him they would leave. "The men you seek," she said. "They passed through the canyon 3 nights ago. They trade with the settlers by the river." Elias felt his stomach turn cold. "You saw them?" "I saw their camp," she said. 4 horses. One had a brand from your place." He stood, heart hammering. "You could have told me sooner." She looked at him without fear. "You were not ready." Anger rose sharp and quick. "You don't get to decide that." "I decide what keeps you alive," she said, her tone calm but firm. "If you had gone before, you would be dead now. Then your revenge would be nothing." The words hit him like a slap. He turned away, hands shaking. The fire crackled between them, casting long shadows against the canyon walls. For a long time neither spoke. Then she said softly, "When my people were taken, I wanted blood too. I followed the soldiers for 3 days. When I found them, I had only a knife. I thought that was enough." Elias turned back. Her eyes glistened in the firelight, not with tears, but with something sharper. "What happened?" "They laughed," she said. "They left me for the wolves." He swallowed hard, the anger draining from him. How did you live? I learned, she said simply. I watched. I waited. You will too. He nodded slowly. He didn't thank her, he couldn't, but something shifted between them in that moment. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. That night, he dreamed of his boy. The child stood in the field, holding the tin horse, smiling. Behind him, a woman's voice called out, faint as wind through cottonwood leaves. When Elias woke, dawn was breaking, soft and blue. Nahi was already saddling the roan. They rode out together, the desert stretching endless ahead, the sky wide and merciless. Two souls bound by loss, moving toward something neither yet understood. They rode for 3 days through a country that seemed carved from bone and light. The land was empty but for wind and stone, yet every mile carried its own kind of memory. Once, this had been cattle country before drought, before war. Old fence posts still stood like broken ribs along the ridges, and in the arroyos, bits of rusted iron and glass winked in the sun, reminders of hands long gone. Elias rode in silence most of the way. The pain in his ribs had dulled to a low throb, but his thoughts were louder. Every hoofbeat seemed to echo a name: his boys, his wife's, the men who took them away. Nahi said little. She rode ahead, scanning the land like a hawk, her back straight, her braid swinging against her shoulder. At night, when they made camp, she taught him small things. How to find water where the sand looked dead. How to make a fire from stones when wood was scarce. How to listen to the stillness. The earth speaks, she told him one night, her eyes reflecting the flames. But only to those who stop shouting at it. He wanted to ask what she meant, but the quiet between them was sacred, so he just nodded and watched the sparks drift upward like tiny souls. On the 4th day, they came upon a small settlement near the river. A cluster of wood shacks and canvas tents huddled beneath a bluff, smoke rising from cook fires. Elias recognized the place, an old trading post turned camp for drifters and deserters. It stank of whiskey and sweat, and the sound of rough laughter carried across the wind. Nahi dismounted first. They are here, she said. Elias followed her gaze. Near the corral stood 4 horses, one of them with a branded flank a-star over a half-circle. His brand. His breath caught. His fingers tightened around the reins until his knuckles went white. He wanted to draw his rifle then and there, but Nahi touched his arm. Not yet, she said. He turned on her. You expect me to wait while they drink and laugh with my son's blood on their hands? She didn't flinch. You wait because you still have something to lose. I do not. The words stopped him cold. Her eyes were calm, but beneath that calm was fire-controlled, knowing. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw the scars that ran along her wrists, thin as reeds. He said nothing. She pointed toward the corral. They will drink. They will sleep. Then we take what was yours and leave this place behind. Elias stared at the camp, jaw tight. His heart screamed for revenge, but something in her voice, steady, grounded, cut through the storm inside him. You've done this before, he said quietly. I've survived this before, she answered. They waited until night fell. The laughter in the camp turned to slurred voices, then silence. The moon hung pale and broken above the river. Together, they moved like shadows. Nahi crept ahead, silent as dust, while Elias followed, each step measured. The horses were tied near a trough. When he reached the branded one, his throat tightened. The saddle still had his initials carved into the leather. He placed a hand on the animal's neck and whispered something he couldn't name. Then came a voice behind him. Well, I'll be damned. Look what the fire dragged back. Elias froze. He turned slowly. A man stood there, half drunk, a rifle slung over his shoulder. His beard was thick and gray, his eyes mean and bright. Elias knew that face. Jed Crowder. Thought you'd burned up like the rest, Jed said, smirking. Guess the Lord's got a cruel sense of humor. Before Elias could move, Nahi stepped from the shadows. The moonlight caught the edge of her knife. Jed laughed. Ain't that something? Brought yourself a little savage, did you? The sound that left Elias's throat was not a word. It was the growl of an animal that had been chained too long. He lunged. The 2 men hit the ground hard, rolling through the dust. Jed swung the rifle up, but Nahi moved faster. The knife flashed once, quick and sure, slicing across Jed's arm. He roared and swung at her, catching her shoulder. Elias grabbed a rock and brought it down. Once, twice, until Jed stopped moving. The world fell silent again, save for the ragged sound of their breathing. Nahi pressed a hand to her shoulder, blood dark against her skin. Elias reached for her, but she shook her head. "It is nothing," she said. He looked down at Jed's still body. "There were 4, he muttered. "Where are the others?" Nahi's eyes swept the darkness. "Gone, maybe, or waiting." Elias wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands were shaking, though he didn't know if it was from rage or something else. "We can't stay." "No," she said. "We take the horses and leave." They moved quickly, saddling what they could and heading toward the river's edge. The night swallowed them, the current whispering against the rocks. When they finally stopped to rest, the stars had turned faint above them. Elias sat by the water, staring at his hands. "I thought killing him would feel like something," he said, "but it don't." Nahi knelt beside him. "Death never fills the hole," she said quietly. "It only keeps it from healing." He looked at her, then away. The wind carried the scent of sage and rain. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried a lonely sound that seemed to belong to both of them. "Why did you help me?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because you are not done yet." He didn't know what she meant, but for the first time in months, he felt the faint pulse of something inside him, hope, or maybe its shadow. They crossed the river at dawn, the chill cutting through their clothes, the current biting like truth. The horses strained against the pull, water rising to their bellies. But Nahi kept her head forward, steady, her hand resting on the roan's neck. Elias followed her lead, teeth gritted, his body aching from the night's fight. When they reached the far bank, the land opened wide again, an endless sweep of pale grass and red stone, dotted with cedar and sage. The kind of country where a man could vanish or start over, if he was brave or broken enough. Elias built a small fire to dry them, though his hands shook as he struck the flint. Nahi sat nearby, silent, binding her wounded shoulder with a strip torn from her sleeve. The blood had slowed, but her skin was gray with fatigue. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." He managed a faint smile. "I'm too tired to argue." She looked up, her dark eyes catching the first hint of light. "Good. Then you'll listen." He raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "To what comes next." She nodded toward the mountains. "The other men are heading west, toward the reservation lands. They will trade, maybe hide." Elias frowned. "How do you know?" "I know the way cowards move," she said simply. "They seek places where no one looks." He stared into the fire, the smoke rising between them. "I can't stop until I find them." Nahi's voice softened. "And when you do, what then?" He hesitated. The truth felt too raw to touch. "Then maybe I can breathe again." She said nothing, only watched him, eyes unreadable, until the silence stretched long enough to hurt. Then she stood and walked to the edge of the river. The sun had broken over the horizon, turning the water to gold. For a moment, she seemed carved from it, small, fierce, unyielding. Elias rose and joined her. "You said your people were taken," he said quietly. "You ever think of finding them?" Her jaw tightened. "They are not to be found. Those who lived were sent far away. Those who died are part of the land now." "I'm sorry," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Don't be. You did not swing the rifle." He didn't answer. The sound of the river filled the space between them. By midday, they were riding again. The trail grew rougher, cutting through canyons that twisted like scars. The sun baked the ground until it shimmered, and the air smelled of dust and juniper. Elias watched Nahi as she rode a figure of quiet resolve against the vastness. There was something in the way she sat her horse, shoulders straight, face lifted toward the wind, that reminded him of his wife. The same stubborn grace, the same silent strength. He found himself thinking less about revenge and more about survival, about what came after. But whenever that thought tried to take root, guilt tore it out again. They camped that night beneath a wide stretch of stars. The fire was small, the wood scarce. Nahi took out a pouch from her satchel and poured its contents, a mix of herbs and crushed leaves, into the flames. The smoke turned sweet and sharp, like pine and wild mint. "What's that?" Elias asked. "For healing," she said. And for remembering, he nodded. Seems I've done enough remembering. She looked at him then, the firelight soft on her face. No, you remember wrong. You remember what was taken, not what remains. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't find the words. Instead, he stared at the flames, and for the first time since the fire that took his home, he let the quiet settle inside him without fighting it. When he finally lay down to sleep, he dreamed again, but not of death this time. He saw the ranch before the fire, the fields still green, the laughter of his boy echoing from the corral, and beside the barn stood a woman in a red dress, her hand raised in a slow, forgiving wave. He woke before dawn, tears dried on his face. Nahi was already awake, stirring the embers. "We ride at first light," she said. "The mountains will hide them, but not forever." Elias nodded, tightening the strap on his saddle. The sky was the color of pale bone, the air still and cold. As they rode, a thought came to him, quiet but persistent. "When this is done," he said, "you could come back with me. There's land near the valley, water enough to build something." She turned her head slightly, expression unreadable. "You think the world would let an Apache girl and a white rancher build anything?" He met her gaze. "I think the world's too tired to care who builds what." For the first time, she smiled, small, fleeting but real. "You are foolish," she said. "Maybe," he said, "but I'd rather be foolish than alone." The road bent upward into the foothills, the air thinning, sharp with pine. Ahead, the trail forked, one path leading toward the mountains, the other west into shadow. Nahi stopped and dismounted, kneeling to study the ground. "They passed here," she murmured. "2 days ago." Elias dismounted beside her. "Then we're close." She nodded, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "Close is dangerous." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "We've come this far. We finish it together." Nahi looked at his hand, then up into his eyes. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was heavy with something unspoken, trust maybe, or the first fragile shape of love. The wind stirred the grass around them, bending it in one long breath, and the world felt still for the briefest moment. Then Nahi said, "Together, then." And they rode on. The mountains rose like old gods, their peaks white with the first breath of winter. The air thinned until it felt sharp enough to cut the lungs. Snow still clung to the shadows, and the wind carried the clean scent of pine and cold stone. Elias had always known the mountains as boundary lines, places where men ended and the earth began. But now they felt different, wilder, watchful, as if something in them waited to test him. By the second day in the high country, the trail had narrowed to a thread that wound along the cliffside. The horses' hooves struck sparks from the rock, and below them, the valley fell away into endless gray. Nahi rode ahead, her hair unbound for the first time, dark and loose against her back. She looked younger that way, though her eyes still carried that depth of quiet years. They made camp in a small hollow beneath the ridge. The fire burned low, a faint orange pulse against the snow. Elias sat sharpening his knife, the sound of stone on steel rhythmic, steady. Nahi was cooking a small hare she'd trapped earlier, her movements slow and deliberate. "Tomorrow," she said without looking up, "we will find them." Elias paused. "You sure?" She nodded. "Their smoke rises from the next valley. I saw it at dusk." He took a breath that trembled on the way out. "Then it ends tomorrow." She looked at him. "Something always ends, but something else must begin, or the ending means nothing." He studied her face in the firelight, the faint lines of exhaustion, the scar along her collarbone, the strange calm she carried even when she spoke of death. He wanted to tell her that she had saved him, that her voice had become the only thing louder than his ghost's. But the words felt too heavy to lift. Instead, he said, "You believe in that? Beginnings?" Her eyes softened. "The land believes. It dies every winter and still it blooms come spring." He stared into the flames, the knife resting across his knees. "I don't know if I have any spring left in me." She smiled faintly. "Then borrow mine." They didn't speak after that. The wind moved through the pines, carrying snowflakes that melted on their skin. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled long and low, a song for the lost. When morning came, the world had turned white. The fire was dead, and frost crusted their saddles. They packed in silence, their breath steaming in the cold. The horses shivered, restless, sensing the tension in the air. By mid-morning they reached the ridge. Below, nestled among the trees, stood a crude camp of canvas tents and tethered horses. 4 figures moved about, their voices faint in the thin air. Elias recognized one of them by the limp Billy Hart, a ranch hand who'd once mended fences for him. Elias's fingers tightened on the rifle. That's them. Nahi touched his arm. Wait. He looked at her sharply. Not this again. You can shoot them, she said quietly. But then what? You carry their faces with you forever. I know this. He looked past her toward the camp. They took everything from me, and if you kill them, you give them what's left. The words sank like stones in his chest. He turned away, jaw tight. Then what do I do, Nahi? Tell me. She looked at him with steady eyes. You make them see what they tried to destroy, still lives. He didn't answer, but her words followed him as he crept down the ridge, the rifle cold in his hand. They reached the edge of the camp just as the men were finishing their meal. Billy was talking, laughing too loud. Elias stepped into the open, rifle raised. The laughter stopped. Morning, he said. His voice was low, calm. You boys got something of mine. Billy froze. Elias? Where's my herd? Billy swallowed. Gone. Sold off. Ain't nothing left, Elias. Elias's eyes narrowed. And my family? No one answered. The silence was thick, the wind whispering through the pines. Finally, Billy said, It weren't supposed to go that way. We just wanted the stock. Your wife, she tried to stop us. The fire caught. Elias fired. The shot cracked the air like lightning. Billy stumbled, clutching his arm, blood spilling through his fingers. Next one goes through your heart, Elias said. You'll tell me where they buried her. Billy sank to his knees, gasping. The ridge, north side, we covered them. The boy, too. Elias lowered the rifle slowly. His breath came fast, ragged. Then he turned and walked away, the rifle falling from his hand. Nahi followed him up the ridge, saying nothing. He stopped at the crest and sank to his knees. The ground was frozen, the snow thin and hard. He began to dig with his bare hands, clawing at the earth until his fingers bled. When he found the small wooden cross, his body went still. He touched it once, gently, as if afraid it might vanish. Then he bowed his head. Nahi knelt beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The mountain wind moved around them, whispering through the trees, carrying the sound of his grief away. After a long while, Elias rose. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but there was a strange peace in his eyes. It's done, he said quietly. Nahi nodded. Then we go. He looked at her. Where? Home, she said. He hesitated. I don't have one. She smiled faintly. Then we build one. They left the mountains behind that afternoon, riding down into the valley where the snow melted into rain. The clouds broke open, and light spilled across the land, soft, golden, almost holy. Elias turned once to look back at the ridge, then forward again, toward the open plain. The wind was warm now. The world felt alive again, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself believe that maybe he was too. They came down from the mountains as the thaw began. The snow gave way to wet earth, and the land smelled of rain and rebirth. The river they'd crossed before ran high now, swollen with meltwater, curling through the valley like a silver vein. Each morning, mist lifted off its surface, rising into the pale light, as if the land itself was exhaling. For the first time since the fire, Elias could look at the sky without feeling punished. He rode with his hat brim tipped back, his eyes tracing the slow drift of clouds. His grief was still there, steady and deep, but it no longer felt like drowning. It had become part of him, quiet and heavy, like the scar on his hand. Nahi rode beside him, silent as always, but there was something different in her silence now, softer. The distance between them had begun to close in small ways. An offered canteen, a shared glance, a wordless understanding that didn't need to be spoken. They camped near the river one night, beneath a cottonwood that was just beginning to green. Nahi spread her blanket near the fire while Elias cooked what little meat they had left. The flames painted their faces gold, and the night hummed with the low song of crickets. She broke the silence first. You don't speak her name, she said. Elias looked up. Whose? Your wife. He hesitated. Sarah. The name came out rough, like a word unused for too long. He stared into the fire. She used to hum when she worked. Same tune every morning. Drove me half mad back then. And now? He smiled faintly. Now I'd give anything to hear it again. Nahi poked at the fire with a stick. In my people's way, we speak the names of the dead so they don't fade. The white men bury their dead in the ground. We keep ours in the air. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's better. The flames crackled, sparks rising like tiny prayers. After a moment she said, What will you do now? He thought for a while. I reckon I'll fix what I can. Fences, a roof, maybe a life. She smiled faintly, eyes glinting. You speak like a man with land. He met her gaze. It's still mine. The fire took the house, not the ground. She studied him for a long moment, then said softly, Then I'll help you build. He shook his head. You've done enough for me. She frowned, her voice low but firm. You think helping you means less than helping myself? That's foolish, Elias. He looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift again like the first time sunlight touches a cold field. He wanted to tell her she was free to leave, that she didn't owe him anything. But the truth was, he didn't want her to go. Then stay, he said quietly, if you want. Her eyes softened. I will. They rode the next days in steady rhythm, heading back toward the burned valley where his ranch had once stood. The land was still scarred, the black husks of trees marking the place where fire had taken hold. But amid the ash, small shoots of green pushed through. Grass, tender and brave. When Elias saw it, his chest tightened. He dismounted and knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. The ground was warm, alive. Nahi watched from a few steps away. The fire cleanses, she said. It kills, but it also gives room for life again. He nodded. Seems it does. They worked together over the next weeks, rebuilding fences, mending what they could from what was left. Elias used what timbers remained, and Nahi gathered stones from the creek to build a hearth. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their movements quiet, sure. At night, they shared simple meals, and the silence of two souls learning to breathe in the same rhythm. Sometimes, she told him stories of her people, of the desert spirits, of how the earth remembers everything it buries. He listened, feeling the stories settle inside him like seeds. One evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, Elias stood watching the sky turn to fire. The house frame rose behind him, half finished, but solid. Nahi walked up beside him, her braid loose, her hands rough from work. It's not much yet, he said, looking at the house. It's enough, she replied. He turned to her. You could still leave, if you wanted. She looked toward the horizon where the sun was sinking. I've been leaving all my life, she said softly. Maybe it's time I stayed. He reached out then, slow and uncertain, until his hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. The wind moved through the grass, warm and steady. The valley smelled of ash and spring. Elias looked out over the land that had once broken him and saw, for the first time, something whole. I reckon this is home, he said. Nahi smiled. It always was. That night, the stars came out clear and bright. The world was quiet, save for the sound of the river and the low hum of life returning. Elias sat by the fire, the tin horse his son had carved resting in his palm. He placed it on the mantelstone Nahi had built, beside a smooth river rock she had found and marked with her people's sign for endurance. Two symbols, two histories, both surviving the fire. He felt her presence behind him before she spoke. Tomorrow, she said softly, we build the roof. He smiled. And after that? She hesitated. After that, we live. He turned, and for the first time, there was no weight between them, only warmth, and the quiet knowing that they had both found what they thought was lost forever. The firelight flickered against their faces, and the night held its breath. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a whispered promise, and from that promise, a new family began.